Good evening, everyone. We are still in Mark 7. Though, actually, it's been really a good period of time. We've talked about a lot of important things in Mark 7. And we're still in this section that started with the Pharisees and the scribes being upset that the disciples weren't washing their hands appropriately. And we've gone through that business with Jesus and the Pharisees and scribes. And then Jesus made that statement in verse 15 of chapter 7, where he said, "It's not what goes into your body that defiles you. You are defiled by what comes out of your heart." And we talked about that at great length, and then that the disciples didn't get it and why they didn't get it. So if you didn't hear those classes, that'd be good to hear them. And we are at a really interesting point now where Jesus has started to explain these things to his disciples. And what is going to happen, I would say, is a really powerful statement about the character of people. We have to remember that in their world, when they talk about what comes out of your heart, it is not what comes out of your emotional sense. It is what comes out of logical thinking, decision-making. That's what they think about the heart. And I'll read the passage in a moment after I pray, but I just wanted you to know that this next bit I've found it's, how do I say it? It's both intellectually cool, the way that it's put together, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but it's also terribly convicting. Can I say that? It can be convicting because of the way that it's put together. Now, why don't I pray, and then we'll get into it, because I'm just going to start teaching if I don't stop and pray, because my mind is just reeling. And I will say this, that I was maybe the most decaffeinated person that you know until this morning. And for some reason, old Tim wanted a big old cup of English tea, and poor Mighty, who's here with me, is having to deal with the fact that, let's just say, the meter might be pegged, okay? So I'm going to pray and try to keep it in second gear, okay? Let's pray and we'll go on. Father, I am so thankful for this opportunity to teach this evening and to hear from your heart, from the core of your character and your being, what is important to you and what is important about the way that we live, what you created us to be and what you created us not to be. So I thank you for this time and ask that you will be glorified in what we say in this time. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, let's read. I'm going to start reading right in verse 18, and we talked about all this, but then when we get to 20, and I'll read through to 23, we're not going to get to 23. We're only going to get to the first half of 22. And I did that on purpose. I didn't even bring the notes for that after that with me because I was worried I'd just keep going and going. And I think there's enough in the first part for tonight, and then next time we'll finish it out and move on to the next part of this chapter. But here's what it says. It says, Jesus said, he's speaking to the disciples, "Don't you understand? Can't you see that food you put into your body cannot defile you? Food doesn't go into your heart, but only passes through the stomach and then goes into the sewer. By saying this, he declared that every kind of food is acceptable in God's eyes." Here we go then. And then he added, "It is from the inside that defiles you. It is what comes from the inside that defiles you. For from within, out of a person's heart, comes evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, wickedness, deceit, lustful desires, envy, slander, pride, and foolishness. All of these vile things come from within. They are what defile you." End of story. Because after that, we don't get any response or anything. We move on to the whole crowd of disciples and Jesus moving a long way away to another place in the very next verses. So then he adds, it says in the NLT, it is from what comes from inside that defiles you, for from within, out of a person's heart come evil thoughts. And then it goes on. Now that if you have a pen, you can put a colon after evil thoughts, because the way that it's put together is that it's that evil thoughts thing is actually the precursor to everything else. Everything else is an evil thought. And remember, where does this come from? It comes from the heart, and it's coming out of what? Decisions that are made. Now, what we've got here is a list of vices. This sort of list is really common in the Gentile world, particularly with the Greeks. They often made lists of virtues and vices, and they used them as teaching tools to speak about what was good in a man and what was bad, what was the kind of life you should live. This is really common, and it's so common that when Paul is writing his letters to the churches, think about this. Now think how often you get this and this and this and this and this and this stuff that Paul says, this is good, you should live, think these things, and then he gives all this good stuff, but he don't think these things. It's like that all the time through Paul. And actually this is set up in the same way, only we get vices, purely vices. And everything comes off of the premise that these are things that come out of a person's what? His thoughts, his decisions, excuse me, these things that defile him. And again, defile means to make unsacred. It means to make incapable of being used for holy purposes. This is all about how our life can be used by God. If this stuff is coming out of you, then what it does is it makes it impossible for God to use you for his purposes. And I'll talk where that came from in a moment, but it was generally understood in the ancient world what made a person a good person and a bad person. Particularly outside of the Jewish world, because people knew what was a worthy character. What was shown by your actions, how you lived out things with other people. They knew what good behavior was. Now, the Jews had this added ceremonial cleanliness aspect that confused it a bit, or a lot, actually. But the notions of what is a good character, people talked about this all the time in philosophical discussions, or when they went down to the marketplace and guys were standing around talking about things, they would always talk about what made a person a good person, or what made a person that seemed to be good not good, because he had these vices in him. And they were often encouraged as ancient in the ancient cultures to think about these things, to think about them. In fact, that's why Paul himself says exactly that. Think about these things later, because it's like the normal thing for people to do. The combination, though, of what is good in terms of a virtue and what is good in terms of being used for sacred purposes were confused in the Jewish world because of the rituals of cleansing. Now, Jesus is doing something that nobody'd ever done. He's connecting purity with virtue, or is really connecting defilement with vice. And this has never before it had been so strongly emphasized. Here's the deal. The reason that ritual cleanliness had been emphasized so much was this. I don't know if I said this before, but all of the ritual cleanliness originally just started with the priests. The priests themselves were the ones who were supposed to do all this hand washing and all that stuff. This was not for everybody to do regularly, at least not from the place of where the law spoke about it. It was just that the priests were to keep themselves clean in a ritual sense, primarily because their job was to represent the people to God. And so when they stood in that intermediary space, the washing recognized that they start out as regular common people, but they cleanse themselves so that they can go into the presence of God and do the things that the priests alone did for the people. And this had to do with their sins being forgiven. It had to do with all kinds of stuff. It's all related to the role of priests as they reach up to God on behalf of everybody, the mass of everybody else. Well, here's the deal. The Old Testament speaks directly about the fact that God called on his people, the Jewish people, to be a nation of priests. Their job was to live in such a way that their lives were separate enough that they could then take the rest of the world with them to God. And so what happened was that it became encouraged, and primarily by the Pharisees, and I'll talk about that just in a second, primarily by the Pharisees, it became encouraged that everybody participate in the cleansing rules, because the idea was if they all participated in it properly, then they'd all be what? Equal to priests in their ability to do the sacred things for God. And so then they could be the priests for the world. Now, the Pharisees were particularly interested in this because the Pharisees, unlike what most people talk about, they were common people. They were not Sadducees who were from specific very wealthy families, 7 very wealthy families. They did not control the temple. They did not have any grand power over anything. These were regular men. They're about 5,000 to 7,000, depending on when you look at the numbers, in what years, of people, men who had chosen to join the separatists. The Pharisees were the separatists. And what they did was they separated themselves in a way to be as close to what God had called people to be as possible. And they were common people, and so they weren't looked at as big shots by most people. They were looked at actually by most people as the guys who were actually serious about this stuff, and they were respected generally. And the Pharisees, because they had a heart, unlike the Sadducees, towards common people, they taught this cleansing thing initially, primarily to bring the people along with them into becoming a nation of priests. Now, by the time you get to Jesus, there are enough Pharisees that are proud of their own separateness, even from common people. But you notice they went right after Jesus' disciples, because his disciples were what? Common people. And their interest was in getting everybody, well, at first their altruistic notion was to get everybody cleaned up so that they could then be the priests of the world. Now, it had worked backwards, and they were trying to separate themselves completely now. But anyway, you get my point. I'm sure you get my point. That now Jesus is connecting defilement to character. And the reason that's weird to them is because your physical state is mutable. It can change. While your character is something that they assumed was there. You were this person. And now Jesus has just taken away all of the external ways that we're defiled and just said the only thing that counts is what you are in there. This mutable stuff, we don't need to talk about that. Your physical state is not important. It's who you are. And as I said earlier, Jesus is taking away he's just saying, well, you don't need to worry about whether you eat a dog or an owl, though they didn't eat owls and dogs, but just to say that it was the action that comes out of a person's heart, not the action that put things into a person. And so, I know I've beat that up a lot, but this is all about distinguishing between that which we are simply by virtue of our birth, which is we're capable of becoming flawed, and the others that we choose to do things that make us extremely flawed. That's what Jesus is talking about. What he begins with, he starts out by saying, from within, out of a person's heart, come evil thoughts. And I said, put your colon there. That word is, it's kakoi. How could I forget that one? The word is kakoi, and it means evil, like evil, like really evil, okay? These are evil. This is like about as bad as you can get when you call something by this word. It's a terrible word. And what we're going to get when he says these are the evil thoughts that come out of your heart, the place that you make decisions, he's going to give us two lists. Each list has 6 vices. That's important. I'll talk about that in a second. The first list is all in the plural. It's all plural. It's all stuff that you either do in conjunction with someone else or you do it with someone else to somebody else, okay? It's all plural. Then the second list of 6, which we'll talk about the next time, is all in the singular because it's all stuff that you think about yourself that leads to other action. Now, these are 2 lists of 6. I don't think I'm stretching it. The number 6 in the Bible always is the number for mankind, for man. And it is always got when you get 6 of anything, you need to step back and go, And when you get one group of 6, you go, you must be talking about mankind in some way. When you get 2 6s, you go, wow, this is important. Now that's where we are here. What's the number of the big number everybody's always worried about? It's 666 because it's 3 6s, and you better take note of that. There's something going on with that dude. But I'm just saying the 6s are important because why? Because we are talking about the essence of mankind when he is completely outside of what makes him worthy to be used by God for sacred purposes. This is mankind at his most fallen. Okay, mankind. And the reason it's 6 is because that's the day that man was created in the creation. Okay, but anyway, so that's what we have here. And now, again, we cannot forget that this is all about contemplated action. Let me look at my notes here. Okay, the first word, it goes, and I don't know how much time do I have here, Miney? Let's see, how far am I? Am I halfway?
No, you still got about 4 more minutes to 20 minutes.
Oh, good. I'm good. I think we'll get through this. Okay. The first word is sexual immorality in the NLT. The first word in the Greek it's porneia, or pornei is in the plural. And it is the plural for fornication. The word actually encompasses all forms of sexual immorality, but particularly against one's married partner. Actually, the word in its nounal form, if that makes sense, it's the noun form of this porneia, is the title for a prostitute. And there is a ton of figurative use of this word in the Septuagint, in the Greek version of the Old Testament, to speak about the unfaithfulness that arises out of the hearts of mankind related mostly to Israel's relationship with God. And it is it's important to remember that when we start talking about all kinds of sexual, as it says here, immorality, the reason that this comes out of a man's heart is this. Of all of creation, there's only one creature that has been given the responsibility to take ownership of their own actions. We do not give animals a rational reason. They don't rationally choose to mate. They don't rationally choose to kill. They don't rationally choose to do anything. They do things based on just their instinctive actions. Mankind is separate from the animals because we make our decisions, or we should, through rational thinking, and we are given dignity over and above the rest of the animals because we have to take responsibility for our own actions. In other words, we're not animals. We are not animals. And so, because of this, and so this is important to remember when we start talking about sexual action, because so often people use the excuse that I couldn't help myself, or I got carried away, or blah, 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 about any of this stuff. And the truth is, there is a moment, always, where we, as human beings created in the image of God, can make a rational decision to not do something, and particularly in this realm of sexual immorality. Now, here's the interesting thing. People often point to what Jesus said when he said something like this. He goes, they were talking about adultery. And he goes, but I say that if a man even lusts after a woman, he's already committed adultery with her where? In his heart. Now, we always think of that as sort of like a character thing going on in his heart. But Jesus wasn't talking about making some sort of emotional thing. He's committed adultery, and it's not sort of like a romantic or weepy or even deeply, I don't even know how to describe it. It means he's thought about it. He's thought about it, and in his what? Rational thinking aspect of his being, he has pictured himself doing what? Having sex with someone who's not his wife. That's what Jesus is talking about. We don't go there very often because we don't think about it like that, but that's what this is all about here. It's this particular thing when it says an evil thought that comes out of your heart is all kinds of sexual perversion. We are not animals. We have to take responsibility. And we definitely have to take responsibility for that which we've thought about, come to a decision about, and then acted on. That's what Jesus is talking about here, okay? So this is why it defiles us, what comes out of us. Because if that's what you're thinking about, and then that leads to your action, that kind of action, how in the world can God use you for something sacred? I'm just saying. Okay, that's the first one. Oh, by the way, I want you to take note of the fact that the first ones all have a very close connection to the Ten Commandments. Jesus is naming things that the people listening, the disciples would have had a recognition of. The second one is, it says, theft. That's a pretty good, the word is klotai, is the word klotai, and it means theft, to steal. Now, but to be honest with you, I don't know if you know this, but you know in the Ten Commandments, when it's thou shalt not steal, it's actually about people. It's actually the word that's used there is actually about stealing people to make them slaves, or stealing people from other people who work for other people and things like that. It's a theft that's far more heinous than just stealing. But this word here is theft. This is stealing things that aren't yours. Theft is considered an act against somebody else, and that's in the plural. So we have to decide whether Jesus was talking about two people or three people who work together to steal something from somebody, or whether it's somebody who's made a plan to just keep stealing from lots of people, thefts. But there is almost no chance that anybody, and I know that some people have an illness related to stealing. I know that. But most stealing is not something that is done because of a genetic character flaw. It's because they've thought about it. They've thought about it. And they see something, and they see an opportunity, and they take it, and they do it to whom? Somebody else. I don't know if you've ever had anything stolen, but it's pretty terrible when somebody steals something from you. And it really doesn't even matter what it is. I had my watch stolen out of my locker when I was a sophomore in high school. It was a Timex, not anything of any real value. But I remember almost nothing about Jim in my sophomore year except that I had my watch stolen, and that when we had to wrestle, I thought it was cool that I knew that every dude that was in the little space where my locker was in my weight class, and I beat each one of them, and whichever guy had stolen my watch while I was in the shower got his head crushed by me a little bit. So I'm just saying. Now, am I getting emotional here? It's okay, I'll settle down. But that's just the way that theft works, and Jesus says it comes out of the heart. The third one is murder. This word it's phonai in the Greek. This is not the word for just generally killing somebody. It is the word, it is a thought-out action. Just as in the commandments, in the Ten Commandments, that does not say thou shalt not kill, as in anybody or anything. It means you will not plot out and then murder somebody. This is not a statement against war or self-defense or any other hunting. I'm not saying that makes them all perfectly okay. I'm just saying that the commandment that thou shalt not kill was about murder. Premeditated, thought out murder. That's what this is. It is a thought out action with a specific target. And I think I'm about out of time. But you can see where we're going here. These things are all things that we contemplate. And the reason that this is important is because what are people who are following Jesus supposed to be contemplating? They are supposed to be thinking about the way that they can, serve others, the way that they can be a witness of the goodness of God, that they can bring, healing into the world. And then when they are thinking in those ways, they can be used for sacred purposes. But when you're thinking about other things that might lead to this kind of action, there is just no way. And Jesus just wants to make sure that everybody knows that's following him that these are things you decide. And you can stop it when your mind starts going there, because you're not an animal. You can make those decisions. Okay, so that's good. And I only got half where I thought I was going to go. But next week, we'll finish it up and we'll get on to the others, I promise. And I do want to say that I probably will be giving some announcements next week about just general stuff that relates to me and things like that. Nothing bad. I just want you to know that there's stuff coming, and I'll just tell you about it next time. So I'll see you next week.